Good morning to everyone. As Mr. Gerard E. Chairman mentioned yesterday, charities are disclosing more and getting more transparent over the years. Donors these days, they are also more informed of what the charities are doing, also will tend to donate to those whose social causes they can relate to. This is actually indeed heartening. My presentation today is actually, there are 4 parts to my presentation today. First will be the disclosure requirements, the relevant regulations and best practices for disclosure. What are the key risk areas that we deem is important to charities? Sustainable development goals, which is relevant to charities. And last but not least, what are the benefits of being transparent? I shall not bore all of you by going through the details of the required disclosures, be it statutory or not. The purpose of this slide is actually to list down the disclosure requirements relevant to charities. Mandatory ones are charities, accounts and annual report regulations, which we call the AR regulations, charities, IPC's regulations, and we also have the recommended disclosures as outlined in the Code of Governance for Charities and IPCs, which actually sets out the best practices in governance and management. The Charity Transparency Framework, which is actually first launched in 2015, aimed to improve transparency and accountability in the charity sector. And last but not least, the Parent Framework, which is an integral part of the visibility guide that helps NPO enhance transparency and accountability. How charities can better present their information with the principles from this visibility guide's Parent Framework can be weaved into their annual report. However, I would like to draw everyone's attention to this Principle 8 of the Code that specifically mentioned the need for disclosure and transparency. Do, however, note that other than this guiding principle, the annual report has also need to be prepared in accordance with the charities annual accounts and annual report regulations, as well as charities IPC regulations. In this Principle 8, it specifically did mention that the charity should be transparent and accountable in its operations. Charity should provide information about its mission, structure, programs, activities, and finances, as well as be responsive to requests for information. Let's look at one example of the disclosure of programs and operations. I guess most charities would have, they're actually quite elaborated on their programs and activities. In fact, a report explaining the activities held is actually a requirement in the annual report regulations, Regulation 7B as well. So this annual report, in a way, is actually a platform for charity to showcase to their stakeholders what they are doing and their social causes. Here, I have used a community foundation as an example on how programs and operations are disclosed in the annual report. Community Foundation, it has a unique business model. And I guess this pictorial illustration of their ecosystem make it easy for the readers to understand. And of course, with the code comes the governance evaluation checklist that every charities must comply, and if not, explain on an annual basis. This certainly serves as a tool for charities to assess themselves against identified good governance and disclosure standards. And as I have mentioned earlier, the COC Visibility Guide comprises Parent Framework, which sets out good reporting practices for charities to effectively communicate their impact and accountability to their donors in their annual report. By adopting this guide, charities can help enhance public interest in the charity sector and in turn leads to higher amount of donations. So what does Parent mean? Let us just quickly go through. First is your purpose. We need to be clear with our purpose. And of course, we need to state it. Then we need to align our activities with our purpose. And after that, we need to state what is the results to account for this effective use of resources. And we must provide evidence through testimonials. And of course, the annual report needs to ensure there's this ease of navigation so that readers is easy to have a quick overview. And last but not least, be transparent. Let the stakeholder know your area of improvement and your plans for the year. So from our experience in dealing with the charity sector, we actually have identified for today's session 6 risk areas that we deem are critical. One would be the governance and ethics, the need to build robust governance to maintain key stakeholder trust and support. We would have the challenges in ensuring programs are successful in achieving KPIs, creating impact, and deliver outcome. Financial sustainability. Chairman spoke about sustainability in funding yesterday. So there is a need to develop and expand funding sources to reduce over-dependency on a single source of income and to stay resilient and ensure sustainability in our current and future programs and services. Service quality is another risk area. The risk of inadequate staff capacity and competency to support growing needs of programs. Challenges in recruitment and training of adequate, appropriate, and competent volunteers to support programs, especially in this current pandemic situation, and also the need for psychological support and prevention of burnout of staff and volunteers. Cybersecurity, I guess most of you would have known, the lack of adequate or robust IT infrastructure to support your operations and protect data security. Pdpa, any potential breaches of it would result in fines and loss of your reputation. And last but not least, the risk that COVID-19 may lead to. So I guess for the past 1.5 years, with this COVID-19 situation going on, risks that COVID may lead to could be liquidity risk, government funding, your revenue, your donations, whether your reserve is adequate to cover your operational expenses, manpower risk, in terms of the staff or volunteers, maybe they're less willing to be involved or travel out, or volunteers unable to attend certain compulsory training that are not feasible to be conducted virtually. We could have operational risk as well, drop in service standard to beneficiaries, inability to perform certain programs that can only be done physically. We could also have the supply chain risk as a result of COVID-19, whereby supply may be unable to keep with the demand, with overseas logistics greatly affected. And there could also be certain fundraising risks, whereby fundraising events, if usually they are held physically, it could be and this being the main source of funding, because of this we may be unable to hold physical events, and of course impacted your fundraising activities. So I guess with this backdrop, okay, what we have done for the purpose of this presentation today is we have identified 10 areas that we think charities should disclose to facilitate understanding of the key risks. So some are current requirements, some are actually our suggested additional disclosure. So with this, we actually send the questionnaire, in a way we do a survey, to 32 individually charity board members and management. And through SIAS, we had also circulated our survey to the conference participants. And thank you to the 105 participants who have responded. So the survey, which I will show later in the subsequent slides, actually show that many are supportive of most of the suggested additional disclosure. But I guess for this same set of questions, we reviewed the latest annual report of 20 IPCs. Most of the suggested additional disclosures are not currently reported. All right. So in a way, there is this gap between the survey and also the actual annual report disclosure. So the subsequent slides, I will just run through in terms of this, what we have, in terms of this results of the survey, and I have also included certain good practices as seen from annual report by certain charities. Okay, let's begin. Okay, for the first suggested disclosure, we have this disclose the table of key risks, including financial, operational, compliance and information technology risks facing the charity and how they are being managed or mitigated. Interestingly, 75% of those surveyed, be it the 35 that we have previously, 32 that we have previously circulated, or the 105 respondents from this from today's session, 3/4 of them surveyed are supportive of disclosing a table of key risks, but none from the 20 annual report that we come through has this. So let's look at one example whereby I guess this is actually closest to the suggested disclosure would be Care Corner. I'll showcase two. One is Care Corner and the other one is Touch. So Care Corner, if you were to look at what is disclosed in the annual report, it is not something, it is not a motherhood statement on risk management framework. If you look at it, they do have a management risk committee, and the assessment of risk management and internal control effectiveness involve the board, the ARC, the audit and risk subcommittee, and the management risk committee. It also shows that the board and management, they are very much involved and they do not just discharge their duties by outsourcing. Likewise, if I were to look at Touch, it actually disclosed the areas of risk they have assessed and even disclosed their fraud risk management plan. Okay, the next few questions that we ask relates to governance and ethics. Okay, so we ask process for orderly renewal of board and key office bearers, process for regular review of board composition, diversity and skill set, process for performance evaluation of the board, committee and directors, and last but not least, process policy for management of conflicts of interest. So most of those surveyed are supportive, but as mentioned, there seems to be a gap with the actual annual report disclosure. And of course, interestingly, all 20 IPC's annual report that we comb through disclose the last point, which is the policy for management of conflicts of interest. And I guess this is actually not surprising, because this actually is part of the code best practice guide, as well as part of the regulation, IPC regulation requirement as well. Okay, so no, but if I were to look at the first 3 points, none of the annual reports that we look at actually do share how they renew the board and the process. I am sure, I am sure they do have this process in place, but I guess this is really a matter of whether sufficient disclosure has been done. Okay, the next 3 questions relates on the robustness of monitoring. So first, we have the AC comments on whether the IA function is independent, effective, and adequately resourced. Again, we have about 72 to 76%, which are surveyed that say, they do agree that this needs to be done, needs to be disclosed, but none from the annual report. And we have the next one, which is the assistance of independent whistleblowing channel. This, I guess, because this is actually part of the requirement by the code. So I guess, in a way it's consistent when we look at the annual report disclosure. But the third one is actually whether, although you can disclose that you have a whistleblowing channel, but whether this has been disclosed. I guess we saw that 74% of the respondents, that people who participate in the conference today, actually say that this is actually you need to disclose, but we only have 5% of the annual report that we look at that actually do a disclosure. Okay, so let's look at 2 examples again. One is on Touch community and the other one is on the leukemia lymphoma. So both of them disclose their IA function. So though they do not explicitly mention if their IA is independent, effective, or adequately resourced, their disclosure did imply certain assessment of the areas to be covered and give readers a sense of the IA function. For example, if you look at Touch community, they did mention that the audit plan also takes into consideration inputs from their leadership team, referring to the audit universe of Touch. And when I look at leukemia lymphoma, they actually also mentioned that they work with professional audit agencies to review their internal control and aims to achieve standards comparable to the Charity Governance Award. Okay, in terms of the whistleblowing track disclosure, as what I've mentioned previously, while most will disclose they have a whistleblowing policy, not many will disclose if there are any matters arising from this. So I guess one example, the closest example that I can give today would be Leukemia Lymphoma Foundation, whereby they did mention that they do not receive reports pertaining to whistleblowing during the year. Okay, so I shall move on to the next few questions, which is on relating to financial sustainability. Again, for the first two in red, reserve policy, the basis of calculating the reserve requirement, these are something that is really part of the regulation requirement. So in fact, if you were to look at it, I guess, that's the reason why the gap actually between surveyed and the annual report are actually very narrow. And of course, the third one is we thought that, additional disclosure would be good, would be whether the reserve requirement has been met, and also a negative assurance on material non-compliance with funding conditions. So if you were to look at that, again, this actual disclosure in the annual report, it falls very much below what is expected from the survey results. So I have actually another two examples in terms of the reserve policy disclosure, which I guess that's the closest in terms of disclosing on the reserve policy or rather whether they have met. One would be actually on HealthServe. So HealthServe explicitly disclosed they meet the reserve policy target, and they mentioned that it is actually a minimum of 2 years of operating expenditure. Okay, and the next one would be on Tai Hwa Kwan Nursing Home. Tai Hwa Kwan Nursing Home, which actually shows, number one, the ratio of their reserve. And number two, they actually mentions that with this ratio and what is their target, actually is to maintain its reserve minimally equivalent to 3 years of its budgeted expenses. Okay, so the next survey questions that we have asked is on whether there's any, whether it is good to disclose negative assurance on material non-compliance with relevant and applicable service standards and legislations. So of course, if you were to look at that, 70 to 75% agreed that, this is important. But of course, in terms of the annual report, we only have one particular one that does it. Okay, so let's look at one example on how this service quality risk disclosure can be disclosed. I have this Bright Hill Evergreen Home, which is actually a nursing home for the aged sick. Okay, so Bright Hill Evergreen Home discloses in its annual report its clinical indicators, quality improvements, initiatives, and fall prevention project. This, in a way, allows stakeholders, be it the donors or beneficiaries, to have a better understanding of the service quality indicators of this nursing home, and hence, in a way, allows them to make a more informed decision. Actually, disclosing the service quality risk, in a way, I guess, is very much akin to maybe for audit quality indicators. That when when some of the AC, they may actually require auditors to provide their AQI, audit quality indicators, in the fee proposal, and I think in a way it forms a basis for the management of the AC, in the selection of audit firm. So likewise, I guess for charity, if you were to disclose in terms of your service quality risk, your indicators, I guess it's actually good information for the stakeholders to make informed choices as well. Okay, the next two slides are actually on cybersecurity and Pdpa. Right, so cybersecurity, of course, it covers safety against cyber attacks. Well, Pdpa covers data protections, whereby there's a set of issues relating to data storage, management, and access. I'm sure all companies, charities or not, agree that both are equally important. Going digital is not only preferred, but I guess it's necessary for us. So I guess as Singapore pushes for smart nation, the charity sector cannot be left behind as well. So, but however, digitalization also brings about a higher risk of cybersecurity and Pdpa breaches. So I guess the latest incident in a string of cyber attack is this early September, whereby we have this personal data breach of My Republic. So from the survey, three-quarter of the people surveyed actually say that, yes, we should be disclosing this. But I guess in a way, when I look at the annual report, for cybersecurity, none. For Pdpa, we have 35%. But I guess one thing to note is that despite that, not many charities do disclose this in the annual report. But I guess for Pdpa, because this is actually a requirement to be disclosed, most would have disclosed in their website anyway, in terms of the Pdpa policy. Okay, so last but not least, COVID-19 disclosure. Okay, so COVID-19, of course, has brought about operational and financial impacts. So in a way, impact on beneficiary and operations, financial impact on the charities, I believe, this is something that is important to be disclosed. From the survey, we have 70% who say that, yes, we must disclose. But of course, what we have is really, in the annual report, not many do it. But let me just share one example, which is Chen Sulam Methodist Children's Home, which actually shows how they have disclosed this COVID-19 disclosure. So I guess Chen Sulam Methodist Children's Home, they disclose how they have changed in the way they work in adapting COVID. So they have disclosed in a way, with this disclosure, in a way, they actually shows how their manpower management risk or operational risk are actually being managed in a way to maintain the same service level to their beneficiaries. Okay, I think the next one is really more of an example in terms of COVID that didn't stop some of the charities from organizing their regular fundraising event. So for example, we have the Straits Times School Pocket Money Fund, whereby usually they will hold their child aid event, of course, physically. But with COVID, it didn't stop then, and in fact, they actually hold it as a virtual event. I guess likewise for many arts charities, they actually have turned their so-called arts event, from physical to virtual. So I guess for organizations that all along have been relying on fundraising events as a main source of funding, and if they are unable to hold it physically, it is something, virtually holding it, is something that everybody should, or rather, I'm sure, most of the charities are already embarking on. Okay, so I guess after going through the survey results and of course showing some current practice from the annual report, we have in fact summarized these 10 suggested additional disclosures in the following two slides. They are actually not labeled in order of importance. And in fact, not all are of equal relevance or importance, and what and how much to disclose really depends on each of its own. All right, so what we have is, okay, number one, table, maybe I just read it out, table of key risks and how they are being managed or mitigated, process for orderly renewal of board and key office bearers, process for regular review of board composition, diversity and skill set, process for performance evaluation of the board, committees and directors, AC comment on IA function, whether they are independent, effective and adequately resourced. So whether any significant matters raised through the whistleblowing channel, whether the reserve requirement has been met, a negative assurance on the material non-compliance with funding conditions, negative assurance on material non-compliance with standard and regulations, and last but not least, steps taken to protect against cybersecurity, comply with Pdpa and COVID-19. So I think these disclosures are supported by most surveyed. And I guess it would be good for all to ponder and consider whether these are something that you may wish to include in your next annual report. Okay, so let me just run through very quickly on the sustainability development goals. I guess with the growing importance of sustainability, there comes a question, should charities adopt SDG, right? So the Global Development Framework actually comprises 17 SDGs, with 169 targets, and there are currently 247 indicators used to measure progress towards reaching this. But when I look at, or rather, if you were to look at all the 17 SDGs, I guess given the nature of charities and their social causes, most of this SDG, if not all, should be something that charities can be related to. So let's say, we look at one example, Chansula Methodist Children's Home. They provide shelter, care, and protection to boys and girls ages 5 to 21 who come from low income, broken, dysfunctional, or abusive families in Singapore. Okay, and before I map the SD goal, if you were to look at what they have disclosed, okay, they in their annual report, they talk about maintaining education standard, healing through therapy, they have a family care teams, and they have all the pilot programs and enrichment programs. So if we were really to map in terms of the, the causes or the programs that this charity have with the SDG goal, we can actually, in a way, map it such that, number one, SDG goal 1, no poverty. This is, I guess, something that the charity can relate to. 3, good health and well-being. 4, quality education. 12, responsible consumption and production. And 16, peace, justice, and strong institution. So I guess I'll just leave this SDG guidelines as it is for today. I think it is something for everybody to ponder about, and as to whether charities need to moving forward need to actually align this with the 17 goals. I guess it is something for everybody to bring back and think through. Okay. So I guess before I end my slide, I guess the most important thing is after, going through the past maybe 20 minutes or so in terms of the disclosure, what needs to be disclosed, what will be the additional disclosure that we deem may be important, may be critical. The important thing is what is the benefits of more transparency. So I guess charities, we should embrace accountability and transparency as a matter of ethical leadership and also as a legal compliance. Accountability, in a way, is an obligation or willingness by a charity to explain the action to its stakeholder. It is a duty, right, to account and disclose important information. On the other hand, transparency is actually an obligation or willingness by a charity to publish and make available critical data about the organization. Transparency is actually trust building tool. The more transparency your organization are, the more trustworthy you will be viewed by the public, donors, and regulators. So I also wish to emphasize here that when we talk about transparency, it doesn't really just mean disclosure in annual report. It can be disclosure in your donor forms. It can be disclosure in website. It can be disclosure in your official social media. So who benefits from transparency? Okay, who are our stakeholders? Okay, we have our donors, our funding agencies, we have our volunteers, our employees, and our beneficiaries. So by being more transparent, we allow our beneficiaries to know that they are cared for and their well-being are protected. The next one would be, of course, the rise of social media also has been giving more power to the public. And in a way, it creates an audience of donors who expect more control and transparency over where their money goes before they can trust a particular charity with their donations. So maybe an analogy is if you like to track your order from the, track our Taobao order from the warehouse in China to our doorstep. Likewise, a donor also like to track their money from the point of donation through to its beneficiary. So in a way, the charities owe the stakeholder as a duty to account and disclose important information about the charity and helps stakeholders like donors or regulators to better understand the charity's setup, work, and processes. And I guess not less importantly is also that, by being transparent, it is accountable and transparent, earns the employees and volunteers trust and creates a positive workplace culture. So I guess to conclude, being accountable, fulfilling your fiduciary duty is actually key. after which comes the need to articulate what you have done or not done and disclose in the appropriate media. We all have to keep in mind that transparency builds trust among your stakeholders. When you earn your stakeholder trust, you are actually more likely to earn their cooperation and support. So I look forward to seeing more of you participating in the 2022 Transparency Award, which I guess the deadline is end of October. So with this, I have come to the end of my presentation, and I wish everyone safe and healthy.